Welcome to today's school-wide assembly. We will learn about and discuss assessment in your child. During this assembly, we will define 3 types of assessment, talk about them in depth, learn about content versus language learning, and end with some guidelines to support your child's learning. Study this picture. Education should provide an equitable education for all students. Recently, I stumbled across this image online. I think the picture of reality is so true in many classrooms. But what does tearing down the fence and liberation in the last quadrant represent in terms of education? A colleague suggested that the fence represents the barriers that exist in government and school policy that prevent students, such as English learners, from accessing learning. I agree with that representation, but the fence could also be representative of inflexible teachers. In truth, we don't need to provide ladders and hope students can climb. We need to remove the barriers that prevent learning. Author Rick Riordan said, quote, "Fairness does not mean everyone gets the same. Fairness means everyone gets what they need." Teachers should use an equity framework without barriers like fences or walls to prepare lessons, units, and assessments. Within this framework, students will have a variety of pathways that result in learning. How is this liberation? The opportunities given to students to master their learning must be based upon the different funds of knowledge that all students have gained through their own life experiences. Therefore, teachers must understand students' ways of thinking and viewing the world. They need to get to know each student, and from this, build a classroom culture that celebrates everyone's differences and draws upon those as strengths to support learning and assessment. For example, students who are learning English as another language can better show what they've learned when assessments allow the use of their native language or other means of communication. When uniqueness is not factored in, the result is unfair education practices that disrupt learning. In the case of English learners, language barriers can block what enters their mind and what comes from their mind. This can be prevented when teachers use assessments that are designed to capture student learning by varying them according to student need. Here are some concepts. First, learning objectives or goals are what the students need to learn in any given lesson. Second, success criteria show what to aim for to master the learning goals. In between the two is the various pathways students can take to get there. For English learners, the path to success must allow for a connection between learning and language. And so assessments must be created that capture student learning regardless of language ability. In this presentation, you will hear about different types of assessments that support learning and measure success. I will introduce these varieties and explain how they fit into an equity framework. I hope this information will better prepare you for understanding and supporting your child's learning. Take a moment to consider the questions on the slide, then turn and talk to each other. As parents and caregivers, you currently hold perceptions about assessment that might be different from the perspective of teachers who assess from an equity mindset. Let's watch a short video from a teacher's point of view.
I'm Larry Ferlazzo. Differentiating instruction. To some educators, it conjures visions of having to create a different lesson for every student in the room and long nights of planning and grading. That insanity is not what differentiation is all about. Differentiating instruction is really a way of thinking, not a pre-planned list of strategies. Oftentimes, it is making decisions in the moment based on this mindset. It's recognizing that, to paraphrase Rick Wormley, fair doesn't always mean treating everyone equally. It's recognizing that all of our students bring different gifts and challenges, and that as educators, we need to recognize those differences and use our professional judgment to flexibly respond to them in our teaching. Carol Tomlinson talks about the ability to differentiate in 3 areas: content, process, and product. For content, student choice is one way we might differentiate, like allowing students to choose their research topics or essay prompts. As teachers, we need to keep our eyes on the prize. In other words, we have to keep asking ourselves, what are the main learning objectives? One day, my students were writing an argument essay about what would be the worst natural disaster to experience. John's head was down on the desk. He was not doing anything. I knew that he was interested in football, so I told him that he could write an essay on why his favorite team was the best. He would still have to make an argument just about football instead of hurricanes or earthquakes. His eyes lit up. He got to work and wrote what his mother later told me was the first essay he had ever written in school. He had followed all the guidelines of a good argument essay. The prize, in this case, was learning to write an argument essay, not learning to write about natural disasters. To differentiate by process, teachers can change up how they group students. Sometimes a mixed ability group might work best, while sometimes it might be appropriate to have same ability groups. We might have an English proficient buddy work with an English language learner to help them out. During independent reading time in my early morning class several years ago, one student tended to fall asleep. I told him that if he wanted, he could go to the back and sit on a desk and read. Soon, several others joined him. A few days later, I saw another student dozing off. Before I could say anything, one of his classmates whispered to him, "Just go sit on the desk." Again, it's a matter of keeping our eyes on the prize. What are the learning objectives and what are the best roads to get there for different students? Teachers can also differentiate by the type of product students create. The major demonstration of learning doesn't always have to be an essay or a multiple choice test. One year I had a student who liked to doodle when other students or I were talking. I told her it was okay as long as she was doodling about the information we were discussing. She built on those doodles to create a final project that brilliantly and visually represented all the key points we had covered. When I give tests, I often give students an extra blank page where they can write anything else they remember about the topic being tested that they think is important. I often find the quality of thinking and writing better there than in response to my test questions. None of the differentiating strategies I've mentioned have created any extra work for me. They did require that I had relationships with my students to know their strengths, challenges, and interests. And I needed to demonstrate flexibility in my thinking. Making these strategies successful also required building a strong class culture so that some of the students were being treated differently and they understood why. And they understood that that was the only way to be truly fair. The ideas mentioned here are just a drop in the bucket. There are a zillion other ways we can support our students' gifts and challenges. We just need to keep our minds and ears open.
How is this teacher's ideas different from the ideas about assessment that you currently hold? What should assessment be? Teachers using assessment to build bridges to educational equity rely on multiple sources of information that is reported in meaningful ways to inform their teaching. Meaning that when teachers use a variety of assessments, they get a better picture of student learning and the gaps in teaching that most likely led to the misunderstanding. Depending on the type of assessment, teachers can spot misunderstandings as they are occurring. What do you think the teacher can do then? Right, they see what wasn't learned and can adjust instruction to fill the gap, right in the very moment. Before we move forward, let's be sure we understand two very important definitions. Assessment refers to the wide variety of methods or tools that educators use to evaluate, measure, and document the academic readiness, learning progress, skill acquisition, or educational needs of students. This definition is from edglossary.org. And next, equity is the absence of avoidable, unfair, or remediable differences among groups of people, whether those groups are defined socially, economically, demographically, geographically, or by other means of stratification. This definition is from the World Health Organization. Assessment can be packaged three ways. The first two, assessment as and for learning, are the most flexible and are the main focus of this presentation. The first two categories will be explained in depth, and the final category will be touched upon. Here are some basic definitions of these, provided by Margot Gottlieb in Assessing English Language Learners: Bridges to Educational Equity, 2nd edition, 2016. Gottlieb says that assessment as learning is most personalized as it recognizes students as an important data source. Assessment for learning embraces the role of teachers in making everyday decisions from instructionally embedded data. An assessment of learning affords administrators a sense of their school's or district's position in relation to standards reference data. That is definitely teacher talk. Let me explain each in more friendly ways. In assessment as learning, the active learning occurring daily is the assessment, and its key attribute is that students act and advocate on behalf of themselves. They have a say in how they learn and how they demonstrate that learning. They feel in control of their learning. Think back to the video we watched and how the same goal was achieved when the teacher allowed his student to write about football instead of weather. What does assessment as learning look like for students? Students first understand the learning goals, then they choose a pathway that they are comfortable with that gets them to the end target, the success criteria. Then, within their learning networks, students work together and learn from one another. What does this look like for teachers? Teachers recognize that all students, no matter various differences or barriers such as language learning, are able to undertake challenging tasks. But to help all learners succeed, they must provide supports to make the learning accessible and comprehensible for every student. Remember our graphic at the beginning about equality? Teachers need to help students tear down the fence that is preventing their access to learning. Let's pause a moment for a thought about trust. You, the families of students and your communities, are invited to help build trust between the teacher, your children, and yourselves. This trust is built when everyone values each other's languages and cultures and participates in students' learning through that mindset. In assessment for learning, as teachers observe and guide student learning, they reflect upon how to improve their teaching to support the learning happening in every student. Think back to the video we watched and how the examples demonstrated differentiated learning opportunities. Teachers who are reflective and know their students differentiate to meet their individual needs. Further, turning back to the book I mentioned earlier by Margot Gottlieb, we learn what two other researchers concluded about teachers' roles in assessment. They said that when teachers use data collected through daily check-ins, observations, and discussions with students, they can identify the current state of learners' knowledge, skills, and language development, and therefore propose next steps. That information lets teachers modify their instruction and provide feedback throughout the entire learning process so that all students have opportunities to meet the criteria that have been set for success. Let's pause for a thought. What is at the core of assessment for learning? How should the teacher view it? Students' life experiences and expertise that they bring to their learning is the lens the teacher uses when analyzing student learning data. What is assessment of learning? Assessment of learning includes the tests that tend to cause the most stress among some students, raise the ire of some parents, and receive much publicity in the media. The rally cry of those who oppose them is too much testing. People ask, what's the point? Students and parents wonder how to prepare for such tests. One positive way for you to view these tests is they are a good indicator of how your principal runs the school in terms of equity. Let me explain. If your principal values the contributions brought to the school by students with varying cultures and languages, and sees those as additive, not subtractive, to the school culture, it will show up in these types of tests with scores that are more evenly distributed between minority and majority students in the school. In other words, if he values diversity, he will create policies school-wide and within classrooms that encourage and support the type of assessment we have discussed already. If you recall, those policies encourage the use of students' native languages in classwork, create opportunities for all families to participate in the life of the school, and provide teachers with the professional development they need to become culturally responsive and responsible practitioners. How exactly is this type of assessment different? Assessment as and for learning rely on the model that includes learning goals and the pathways students take to meet the success criteria. And they rely on oral or written feedback within a teach-learn cycle, which often includes interpreting student work using rubrics. In contrast, assessment of learning generates test scores that are compared to the progress of others. That comparison is school-wide, district-wide, statewide, or nationwide. Take a moment to talk to each other about how this information might be useful. A goal of today's event is to help you discover ways to support your child's learning in and out of school. To achieve that, understanding the difference between content learning objectives and language learning objectives is necessary. Content learning objectives describe an academic topic and what is to be learned about. Language learning objectives describe the language needed to understand and communicate the learning of the content objectives. We often describe this as academic language. Let's read the slides together. Content learning describes what students must learn in a given unit of study or lesson. Also called academic achievement, it reflects a student's subject matter knowledge and skills. On this side, under language learning, we see students must learn the language of mathematics, science, social studies, and language arts so they can understand topics when reading and listening and deliver their understanding of such topics through writing and speaking. Two key takeaways are: 1, when language objectives are differentiated according to a student's levels of language proficiency, then English language learners can demonstrate what they can do linguistically while engaged in the same mental processes or higher levels of thinking when working with grade level content. That is, the same mental processes as their non-bilingual peers. Okay, and 2, when English language learners have mastered content area concepts in their home language, they can easily transfer those skills and knowledge from one language to the next. This is why schools and families need to encourage students' use of their native language at school and at home. Here's an example of a content learning objective. Analyze story problems that involve everyday situations to determine the correct mathematical operations to perform. To meet this objective, students need to know words such as add, subtract, divide, multiply, percentage, square foot, area, and so on. This is an example of a language learning objective. These words are considered academic words because they are not typical to social language. Wait, is there a difference between academic and social language? Yes. Let the following example demonstrate that. Academic language includes specialized vocabulary and is the language necessary for success in school. It is related to the content areas of math, science, social studies, and English language arts. In contrast, social language is everyday casual conversation used in non-academic settings. A child learning English as another language will most likely master social language long before academic language. This can create an appearance of the child being fluent in English. However, knowing academic language takes extra work. Teachers and parents must make this distinction so that they can support the child's learning of academic language. A lot influences what happens in the classroom. Consider this graphic. While legislation and policy dictate so much of how schools operate, and while administration assures that those policies are carried out, it is the inner workings of the system where learning happens. This system would be nothing without teachers, students, and families. For just a moment, imagine these 3 pillars if they were not the same height. What would it be like if teachers thought they were the end-all, be-all, and didn't account for the individuality among students, or rarely considered family experiences and ways of knowing? That would be a broken system. To close today's event, please enjoy the following video from the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. I hope it will leave you with ideas about engaging with your child's school and teachers. Following the video, we would like to ask for your feedback. We would like to know your suggestions for supporting your children's academic lives.
As we work to help every child succeed and to close gaps in student achievement, we often assume school is the main place that learning is going to happen. Take Esma. It used to seem to her family and her educators that Esma is always at school. Not true, it turns out. Esma and other students actually spend 82% of their waking hours at home or in their community. All those weekends, weeknights, and breaks add up. When they realized that, the educators in Esma's school district decided to work harder on making the most of the biggest partner in her learning life, her family. This can look different in every school, but for Esma's teacher, it means instead of spending his time arranging a traditional open house, he organizes grade-level parent meetings. Here, Esma's family saw data on how the class is doing in math, reading, social and emotional learning. They practiced new ways to help Esma at home and set goals for how they'll help her improve. Everyone learned from each other as the group talked about how to help the students. Also, near the start of the school year, some staff from Esma's school visited her home. They looked for the assets her family members can bring to the educational process. They learned about their languages, their culture, their lives, their world. Grandpa offered to be a resource for other English learner families, and the school also listened and learned from the family's perspective on Esma's needs. They learned how Mom helps her calm down and focus. This kind of family engagement also makes it easier for the district to develop individualized education programs for students, including those in special education. The foundation is already there for families to engage in their students' academic and career planning too, making that more effective. Throughout the year, the family can attend workshops at the school on things like mental health, homework, or career exploration. Esma's mom saw those meetings on a poster in her work break room, and now she's inviting other parent friends to go with her. Esma's school district works with local businesses, places of worship, the public library, and other partners to reach students and families where they're already spending time. The school provides information frequently in a variety of ways so they can reach every family. Text messages are offered in the most common languages of local families. Esma's family gets photos from her teacher so they know what she's doing during the day. Communication between the school and the family is a group effort focused on helping Esma achieve her learning goals. When Esma wasn't sure what to do on a science assignment, her family knew to contact the teacher for a little clarification. Educators take a positive approach as they look for solutions to any challenges experienced on either side. They're always looking for the family's strengths. Also, when Mom mentions that Esma has trouble making friends, the teacher knows to refer her to the school counselor. The counselor then helps the family join a local Boys and Girls Club with lots of activities for Esma. The teacher knew to do this because the school counselor led staff trainings on resources available in the community and how to help families access them. There's no danger of a family like Esma's ever feeling like an occasional onlooker. The school knows what families have to offer, and the family knows what's going on in the classroom and how to support it. They feel they are active and regular collaborators and decision makers. The district gives families opportunities to learn how to help children succeed at each level of the school system and to serve on school groups. At school gatherings, Esma's adult stepsister and close next-door neighbor also feel included in the community. Staff at the school are trained to be as inclusive as possible, welcoming as learning partners anyone who cares about the child. Esma's school has moved from parent involvement to family engagement. Not surprisingly, engaged families help students learn better. Staff members like their jobs better. Everyone wins. This is backed up by over 40 years of research. Students with engaged families, no matter their income, background, or culture, are more likely to do well in school, enroll in ambitious courses, graduate, and go on to post-secondary education. They also have stronger social skills and fewer disciplinary issues. So how do we make it happen? First, we work to make the shift across an entire school district. Sure, at the elementary level, Esma's classroom teacher is the main person her family interacts with at school, but as she gets older and her schooling more complex, collaboration is definitely bigger than one person. Really, all along the way, the family's interactions with pretty much everyone in connection with the school, from office staff to after-school staff, from bus drivers to principals, will need to be positive for them to truly feel welcomed. So it's a clear expectation in the district. Every employee has a role in helping every family feel connected to their child's learning, no matter what building or classroom that child attends. In Esma's district, a broad team that included school psychologists, social workers, counselors, families, general and special educators, and after-school program staff helped everyone in the school take family engagement to this next level in a way that works for their community. It worked. Esma's family feels like a valued member of the team. Esma, her family, and her educators feel confident that she's learning and happy at school. We have more information about how schools and families can effectively engage with each other around students' learning on our website.
Please use the paper and pens located under your chairs and respond to the following. What are your suggestions for supporting your children's academic lives at home? And what questions do you still have? Please drop off your responses on the tables next to the exits, and feel free to write your responses in your native language. The next school newsletter will share your suggestions. In this way, we all learn from each other. Thank you for participating in our assembly this evening. We are happy you joined us because we value you and your contributions to your child's education.